Welcome to this lecture on animal behavior. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating and universal phenomenon known as habituation. Have you ever wondered how you can sleep soundly through the noise of a busy street? Or how wild animals know which sounds to ignore and which to fear? This simple yet profound learning mechanism is the secret. Let us dive in and understand how it works. To begin our journey, let us think about a very common human experience that perfectly illustrates our topic. Imagine you just moved into a new apartment right next to a busy train track. On the very first night, every single time a train rushes by, you wake up with your heart pounding, convinced it is an earthquake. However, after a week or two, you sleep right through the noise without even stirring. The trains certainly have not gotten any quieter. Instead, your brain has learned to completely ignore them because they do not pose a genuine threat. This everyday filtering process is exactly what biologists call habituation. Now that we understand the basic idea, let us look at how scientists formally define this behavior. In the scientific study of animal behavior, habituation is defined as the simplest form of non-associative learning. It occurs when an animal gradually decreases or completely stops responding to a repeated stimulus. The key here is that this stimulus has proven to be neither harmful nor rewarding to the animal. It is just background noise. Furthermore, this learning is highly specific to that exact stimulus. If a slightly different sound or sight is suddenly presented, the animal will immediately react again. Biologists call this sudden return of the response dishabituation. Building on that definition, it is absolutely crucial to understand what habituation is not. Sometimes an animal stops responding simply because its muscles get too tired to react. We call that fatigue, and it is purely physical. Other times, the sensory organs themselves stop detecting a continuous signal, which is known as sensory adaptation. Habituation is entirely different from both of these. It is an active neurological process. The animal's sensory organs still detect the stimulus perfectly well, and its muscles are fully capable of moving. However, the central nervous system actively learns to tune out the irrelevant signal and chooses not to issue a behavioral response. You might be wondering, why would an animal ever want to stop reacting to its environment, especially in the wild where danger lurks everywhere? The answer comes down to the strict conservation of time and vital energy. Imagine a bird foraging for seeds. If it flew away in a panic every single time a harmless leaf blew across the grass, it would burn massive amounts of calories and never get enough to eat. Habituation allows animals to efficiently sort harmless, everyday occurrences from genuine threats or opportunities. Without this fundamental learning mechanism, an animal's nervous system would be constantly overwhelmed by useless information, leading to exhaustion and ultimately death. Now that we understand the biological concept, let us look at how we can model it mathematically. Because the animal's response drops off very quickly at first and then levels out, it perfectly follows an exponential decay curve. The formula is R of n equals R naught times e to the power of negative kn plus c. Let us break down these symbols. R of n is the magnitude of the response after the stimulus is presented n times. R naught is the initial response, the very first time the stimulus occurs. The variable k is the habituation rate constant. A larger k means the animal learns to ignore the stimulus much faster. Finally, c represents the baseline response, which is the minimal reaction the animal might still show even after full habituation. Before we move on to a concrete example, let us visualize this mathematical relationship. What you are seeing here is the classic habituation exponential decay curve. Look at the vertical axis, which represents the strength or magnitude of the animal's response. The horizontal axis tracks the number of times the stimulus is presented. Notice how the solid curve starts high up at the initial response, R0. As the harmless stimulus is repeated, the curve drops sharply, showing rapid learning. Eventually, the curve flattens out and runs parallel to the horizontal dashed line. This dashed line represents the baseline response, C. The animal's reaction will never drop below this minimal residual level, no matter how many times the stimulus is presented. Now that we have our formula and graph, let us apply them to a classic biology experiment. When you tap on a marine snail's shell, it retracts its tentacles. The initial retraction time is 50 seconds. The habituation rate constant is 0.2, the baseline response is 5 seconds, and we are looking at 10 taps. We want to find the final response time. We plug these values into our exponential decay model. First, we multiply the rate constant by the 10 trials, giving an exponent of -2. Evaluating e to the power of -2 gives approximately 0.1353. We multiply this fraction by the initial 50 seconds to get 6.765 seconds. Finally, we add the 5-second baseline hesitation. The final answer is 11.765 seconds. The snail has successfully habituated, saving valuable foraging time. This successful calculation leads us to an important question. How do biologists find that habituation rate constant in the first place? Let us derive it using a scenario with prairie dogs. These animals give loud alarm calls when they spot predators, but they habituate to harmless humans. Imagine a colony where the initial number of alarm calls per human is 30. After 5 humans pass by, the calls drop to 10. Assuming the baseline response is 0, we need to calculate the habituation rate constant, K. We're working backward here. We start with our standard habituation formula. Since the baseline, C, is 0, it drops out. We substitute the final response with 10, the initial response with 30, and the number of trials with 5. This sets up our equation to isolate the exponential term. Continuing from our setup, our goal is to get the exponential term completely by itself. To do this, we divide both sides of the equation by the initial response of 30. The fraction on the left simplifies to 1/3, or approximately 0.333. This physically means the prairie dog's response has dropped to exactly 1/3 of its original strength. Now, to remove the base e and bring the exponent down to a normal level, we take the natural logarithm of both sides. The natural logarithm is the perfect mathematical tool for undoing an exponential function. When we calculate the natural log of 0.333, we get approximately -1.098. The negative sign makes perfect sense here because the response is decaying over time, not growing. We are now at the final stage of our derivation. We have successfully transformed a complex exponential equation into a very simple linear equation. To find the habituation rate constant K, we simply divide the left side, -1.098, by the coefficient on the right side, which is -5. The two negative signs cancel each other out during the division, leaving us with a positive rate constant of approximately 0.22. This positive value quantifies exactly how fast the prairie dogs are learning to ignore the harmless humans. A higher value would mean they learn even faster, which is a highly beneficial trait for conserving energy in a busy environment. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us reinforce the most important ideas. First, habituation is a fundamental and highly adaptive form of non-associative learning found across almost all animal species. Second, by gradually reducing their response to repetitive, inconsequential stimuli, animals can effectively filter out environmental noise. Third, this mechanism is absolutely critical for survival because it conserves precious energy and prevents the nervous system from becoming overwhelmed. Finally, we saw that we can mathematically model this behavioral decline using an exponential decay function, which perfectly captures the rapid initial drop followed by a stable baseline. Understanding this concept is your first crucial step in exploring more complex forms of animal cognition. Great job following along.